What's the craziest frickin' thing you have ever witnessed? I roll with your own 2 eyes. Diving at about 80 feet in Malakini crater off Maui, I was looking at a reef when felt something smack my tank from behind. I looked up and my dive buddy's eyes were like saucers. The bump was from one of 3 bottlenose dolphins. They circled around us for a few minutes then darted away. We were just awestruck in 80 feet of water with 30 pounds of gear while these amazing animals had a good time around us. Humbling. You're lucky. One of my friends pulled himself up on top of what looked like a raised concrete platform. Turned out to be a vat of cow crap with a crusted layer on top. He got on top of the outside wall, took one step, and fell through and nearly drowned in liquid cow crap, vomited everywhere, jumped into a nearby river fully clothed to get it off. Details, please, this is amazing. I have a couple. 1. Downtown Vancouver, in line for a bar at about 1130 PM. Homeless guy walks by me, about 20 feet, drops his pants, and takes the wettest crap I've ever seen, right on the sidewalk. 2. High school, hanging out with a friend in his bedroom. He gets into a fight with his dad. Dad barges into room, and my friend simultaneously shuts the door. On his finger. Finger came off. Now that I think about it, I live a pretty sheltered life. Thanks Western civilization. Dad barges into room, and my friend simultaneously shuts the door. On his finger. Finger came off. Oh my god. My weirdest experience was also in Indianapolis. I was sitting at a light in a convertible, and a truck driver pulls up and shouts, "Hey, y'all want some mayonnaise?" and then picks up a huge 64 oz plus container of mayo and throws it at me. Thankfully I caught it. Could have gone horribly awry, though. Still to this day I don't know why this happened. Edit. Recurring question. Not only did I eat the mayo, I was on my way to a cookout, so a lot of people ate it. Refreshingly funny ridiculous in the midst of this horrific thread. I was on vacation with my family in San Francisco. 2 homeless men got into a shouting match. One yelled "chew on this, fricky," rushed a flock of pigeons, grabbed one in his hands, and hurled it at the other homeless man. The other man caught the pigeon in one hand, he had a trumpet in the other, and yelled back "respect all God's creatures," and tossed it into the air. The pigeon flew away, and the man resumed playing his trumpet. Chew on this, fricky has to be the greatest statement of all time. I was in Nick for a meeting with a co-worker in June of this past year. Since it was an amazing day out, we decided to have our meeting out in one of the local parks since it was an informal meeting and both of us wanted to enjoy the weather. After spending the morning going through our business, we both decided on lunch. Before we left I needed to find a restroom. There was a public restroom in this park. It was well maintained and clean but really busy. Since all the urinals were taken up, I stepped into a stall and did my business. As I am leaving the stall, I am careful to not swing the door open quickly since there were quite a few people in the restroom. Since I am stepping out slowly, I happen to notice a guy walk in wearing an apron for one of the local coffee places nearby. He walks up to a single urinal, not a trough, a single urinal that is already occupied by someone, squeezes in next to the guy and ends up pee on the other guy's hands. It happened so quickly that the original urinator had no idea what was happening. He backed away from the urinal staring at his hand screaming, "What the frick? What the frick?" The guy with the coffee apron never stopped peeing, just said over and over, "Sorry man." The guy who got peed on threw a punch in the crowded bathroom and the coffee apron guy still never stopped peeing. I decided I did not want to be in that bathroom any longer and quickly snuck out. The coffee apron guy should have gotten a buddy to flank the dude's other side and box him in, then start a casual conversation as if he wasn't there. Driving through Cleveland I saw a naked fat homeless man rolling around on the sidewalk as some super skinny woman with just pants and a durag, SP, no shirt or bra, was screaming at him and kicking him as he rolled down the street. That was the mayor, for your information. I was riding with my sister, and she glanced at the rear view mirror and said, "Oh my god." I glanced back and saw a truck flipping end over end. Not rolling sideways, flipping end over end. My brother-in-law and I ran back to help, leaving my sister and nephew a ways off because we knew it was going to be gruesome. The driver, a teenage girl, crawled out and stood up, without a scratch. Apparently she pulled into the other lane to pass. but there were cars coming before she could make it back in, so she swerved off onto the shoulder and started flipping. When I was 18, I watched my father die on a random driveway as I gave him CPR. He had a heart attack while on a walk with my mother and she ran inside a house and called 911 and me. I was an EMT, off duty at home at the time and showed up at the same time as emergency services. When I got on scene, I started doing chest compressions as a firefighter used an ambu bag on him for air. I clearly remember every second of the incident and I can and have written it out many times in an effort to deal with it and get it out of my head. I used to have horrible nightmares and I couldn't get the thought of my father's vomit-covered dead face out of my mind for a good 2 years. After a few minutes of CPR, a defibrillator showed up and they shocked my dad once. He regained a sinus rhythm for a moment and then flatlined again. We put him in an ambulance and sent him to the hospital. He was declared DOA. I remember my mother softly holding back tears and asking if everything was going to be okay. I was 18 and didn't know what to say, so I said, "Nobody is dead till a doctor says they're dead." She told me to go home and call our family to let them know what happened. When I got home, I cried my eyes out and then got ready to call my dad's mom, sister, and brother, my brother, sister and my mom's mother. Before I could muster the strength to call, my mother called from the hospital to say the doctors had declared him dead. I then had to tell my grandmother that her son was dead and his brother and sister their brother was dead. I had to tell my siblings that our father was dead. It was fricked up. I hate thinking about it and I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. I feel a little numb writing it out here. It brings back crazy flashes of images I don't ever want in my head again. Me and two friends decided to go to the local 24 hours grocery store. Friend A happened to have the gorilla suit, used for fricking with other people in public, in his trunk. Friend B decides that we will buy our fricking pizzas dressed as a gorilla. He dons the suit and we go into the store. It is 3 am. The store is mostly empty, and we laugh as several employees give us odd looks or chuckle at the spectacle. As we walk by one aisle, I look over and see a giant yellow chicken staring back. Two different groups of people, without any planning beforehand, manage to dress up as animals, go to the same store at the same hour. 3 am. Gorilla and chicken stare at each other intensely and prepare to fight, but everybody was too busy thinking, "Holy fricking what the frick." The employees all presumably assumed we had gathered together before entering the store, but to this day, I can't help but imagine the laws of ludicrousness set that moment to be the most important night of our lives. Unfortunately, we got scared and ran from the store with our frozen pizzas in snow, trying to forget the unbelievable coincidence that we had just witnessed. Pizza wasn't that great either. Animal gang war. Holy crap. I've seen numerous accidents, knife fights, you name it, but Mother Nature kicked all their butts this year. We were down in Baja at a beach called Los Cerritos. I was in knee-deep water with my daughter when someone yelled, "Whale." Usually this means someone spotted a spout or something, so I'm thinking no big deal. Well, a second or two later someone else yelled, so I looked up and there they were, a huge gathering of humpback whales, breaching, dancing, tail wagging. I've seen this before, but never in these numbers. Then, instead of watching the show slowly swim away, they stayed. Those whales stayed in that same spot playing for well over 20 minutes. It was the most incredible thing I've ever witnessed, and I've been around. When I was about 13, we had a ritual during the summer where we would hang out at my buddy's house and alternate between hanging on his front porch and playing Super Mario in his second floor bedroom. One day we were doing the same old on the porch and decided to go in and fire up the Nintendo. Good decision. After about 10 minutes we heard a tremendous crash from the four-corner stop out front and the whole house shook. Being closest to the window, I looked out and saw a huge old Monte Carlo flying through the air into his yard. I yelled accident and was the first to run down to see what was going on. I got to the front door and opened it to be greeted by a Ford Escort on the porch, crunched up like an accordion, with a middle-aged man inside covered in blood with his hand extended toward me moaning in agony. It was awful. We spent the next 4 hours trying to stop the bleeding with bedsheets and watched as paramedics tried in vain to get him out with the jaws of life until they finally lost him. I can still picture his face to this day. Poor guy. Edit. Grammar. Whoa. I'm sorry you had to go through something like that. I live in Philadelphia and I was walking up Broad St., one of the main thoroughfares in the city. All of a sudden I hear sirens, which isn't that unusual, and I see a cop racing down the street, which also isn't that unusual, but then I see a Jeep, oblivious to this cop, start to cross Broad. At about this time I got the "oh frick, this is going to end horrendously" face and stop to watch. Well, the Jeep gets about halfway across the street when the cop, who is doing at least 65-70, broadsides the Jeep, goes airborne, and flips end over end twice and then lands upside down. While the cop is flipping over, the Jeep is doing a barrel roll, also airborne, but underneath the cop. And this is where it reaches the point of frick to death insanity. After the cop lands, the Jeep fricking lands on top of the cop, and it's like one giant pile of twisted metal, broken glass, and shredded rubber. A few seconds later, all of the other cops, who were racing to the same crime scene as the first, come barreling down Broad. They all screech to a halt, jump out of their cars with their guns drawn as if the driver of the Jeep was some mastermind terrorist bent on murdering the Philadelphia police force. I like to imagine that when you say cop you don't mean cop car, but an actual police officer. I'm picturing some sort of superhuman man running at 70 miles per hour and T-boning a Jeep with the force of a train. A few years ago I was in Boston visiting some friends and went outside to smoke a cigarette. I'm standing on the sidewalk, enjoying the autumn chill, and two cars screeched to a halt in front of me. Neither moved for a minute and so I didn't think anything of it, just odd. Then, from seemingly out of nowhere, two cops come running at the cars with their guns drawn. The cops were screaming, "Mother, let me see your hands. Don't move, you frick." All kinds of deliciously profane things to shout in the middle of the day in the middle of a city. They slapped the hood of the first car and yelled at the driver to take off and then stood on opposite sides of the rear car, their guns aimed through the windows and still screaming. A few moments later about 10 cop cars pull up, lights and sirens, and cops start piling out with their guns drawn. A couple with shotguns that they racked and then leveled at the car. I was about 20 feet away but none of them seemed to even notice. I wasn't told to back away or anything. As this is happening, a small crowd began to gather. So, since I'm on the passenger side, I can't see the driver. The cops open the door on my side and pull out the passenger. He was a normal looking guy, white guy in t-shirt and jeans, and they lay him down on the road, cuff him, and take him off to the squad car. So far, pretty interesting. Then they take the driver out and lay him on the ground, but since he's on the other side of the car, I still can't see him. Cops then start pulling things out of the car and putting them on the hood. Bottles of pills, a backpack, and then a gun. This is getting more interesting. Then, as we are all watching in rapt attention, this huge cop, black, probably 6'5" and about 300 pounds, reaches down to pick up the driver. He does so with one hand and we all stand in amazement as we realize the driver is a midget and is dangling from the hands of this gigantic cop. The midget is screaming at the top of his lungs, "Frick you cops, blah blah blah," and the cop pretty much carries him one-handed to a squad car and throws him in the back. When the cruiser takes off there was a moment of silence and then everyone, probably 30 bystanders, a dozen cops, everyone starts laughing hysterically at the same time. I called every single person I knew, just so that I would not be accused of making it up. It was hands down the funniest thing I have seen. So many of these stories start when a person goes outside for a cigarette. I need to start smoking. My mom took me to get my hair cut at a salon when I was a 13-year-old boy. I usually get my hair cut at the barber, but we didn't have the time. So, this petite gay guy is talking nice and cutting my hair. Next to me is this 14-year-old chick looking kinda cute. She has two huge gay guys cutting her hair. I'm 6 feet 2 inches 240 pounds, and I was about that size when I was 13. These two guys were lisping and snipping at her long blonde hair with their tight black shirts and huge arms. 10 minutes into her haircut the guys cutting her hair start barking at each other that the other was cutting her hair wrong. These two huge gay guys start throwing fists and connecting with on each other's face. One stabs the other with a scissor in the arm. Blood is everywhere. The petite gay guy cutting my hair gets between me and the brawl, gets some blood on him, and gets hit in the face. The fight gets broken up. The one guy goes to the hospital, and my haircut was free of charge. That was way more exciting than the barber. I used to do security and landed a gig at the Teen Choice Awards. I landed the very best position that night, guarding some high-powered confetti blowers right next to the stage. I was underneath the section of the stage that rose up and the announcers stood. I saw every star from just a few feet away from them. Some older dude sitting near me kept turning around and later told me most of the girls here aren't wearing panties. I wasn't wearing my glasses, so it was pointless for me to stare out into the crowd. I hear them announce Megan Fox coming up to present the next award and look upwards as she walks into position. She wasn't wearing panties. I never do. I am female. Another female friend and I went to pick up a guy we worked with to go play pool. When we got there, he came out with another guy who he introduced as his friend Jack. Jack needed to stop at someone's house really quickly to pick something up. Sure, no problem. I didn't think anything of it. So we stop on the way in a neighborhood and I pull into a random driveway and we wait while Jack runs up to the front door of the house. Someone let him in and a few minutes pass by. We sit there with the radio on making small talk. All of a sudden Jack comes flying out of the house, hops back into my car and yells floor IT. Before I can even think twice, I see a big guy come running out of the house towards my car. I immediately throw the car in reverse, back down the driveway and onto the road. As soon as I put the car in drive and press the gas, big guy jumps on my hood and is glaring at me from a foot away through the windshield. He's screaming to stop the car, grabs and breaks off my wiper, and slides off the car. I gun it, tearing down the street yelling at Jack what the FK. Big guy is chasing the car for 2 blocks until we lose him completely. It turns out, our guy friend was unaware of what Jack had planned, and didn't really know him that well to begin with. Jack had stolen a rather large amount of C from his dealer and put our lives in danger to pull it off. Never in my life had I ever been in shady situation like that, and all of a sudden I was the driver of a getaway car. I've never been so scared in my life. Jack didn't seem to give a crap about any of it, and seemed apathetic when we dropped him off at a gas station and sped off. Our guy friend cut ties with him soon after. I know this will probably get sent to the bottom and one person will read it, but what the heck. When I was in Iraq, we were on patrol in this city in northern-ish part of Iraq. We were ordered to get out and go on foot to secure some buildings. I got caught up talking to our sergeant. I am not sure how much time went by, but out of nowhere, I hear this terrific blast. Someone had tripped an IED device, or it was remotely detonated. I turned around and see bodies falling all around. Everything seemed like it went in slow motion. If you can remember in A Saving Private Ryan, when Tom Hanks storms the beach, and his ears are ringing and he can't hear anything, that's what it felt like. 4 of my fellow Marines were laying on the ground crying in pain. Yes, Marines cry. One guy had his leg blown off. So much blood, so much screaming and yelling. I saw so much awful stuff over there. I never even told my parents' friends about this story. It sickens me. OSU Michigan football game in Columbus 2005/2006. I forget. After the Bucks won, I stepped onto the porch with a few friends to have a smoke. As soon as I get outside, it smells like smoke. Sure enough, there is a 7-foot high stack of proc furniture on fire right in front of the house I was at in the middle of the road. The fire really begins to grow as dozens of people are continuing to toss more and more couches and chairs onto this inferno. Now keep in mind, all of this takes place in a little under 1 minute. Out of nowhere, a city snowplow comes flying out of the alleyway and crushes the whole pile down to nothing and scatters it all over the road and alley. Cheers erupt from all the neighboring houses at the scene, loving the hysteria that is going on around them. All of a sudden, a huge beam of light shines down right onto the street, followed by another as 2 police helicopters swoops across the area. Then almost immediately after all of this crap is going down, a wall of police on horseback arrive. I mean, these men owned the street sidewalk to sidewalk, batons in hand, just swatting at anyone stupid enough to get in their way. They marched right down the street and dispersed the area in less than 1 minute. No one was injured. Best thing I've ever seen. Dispersed is an awesome misspelling. You know how sometimes when you hear someone committing an act of douchebagery, your immediate reaction is wishing they get exactly what's coming to them? Well, one night I was sitting on a bench outside a train station, and I can hear this guy driving like a real jackass. I can't see him yet, but I can tell from the sounds that he's doing burnouts and donuts and the like on the public street next to the building. I say to myself, I hope that butthole wrecks his car, and as soon as I get out the word car, I look up and see him come screaming around the side of the building and slam his car head on into a telephone pole. It wasn't particularly crazy by conventional standards, but the timing of it was just insane. I've seen a camel get so angry that it threw up its own stomach. A close second is the time I was cave diving and I came around a corner only to end up face to face with a shark. It was just hanging out and we scared the crap out of each other. A third was the time we came upon a pod of dolphins that took shelter from a recent storm in a cove. There were about 60 of them. I put on my fins and swam with the dolphins as long as they let me. I knew I had to stop when one of the larger males very suddenly darted towards me and blocked my path. Disclaimer: I live in an old farmhouse, so I was lying on my couch surfing the internet on my laptop when something tickled the right side of my neck. I batted it away, thinking it was just a fly, but I saw something sort of move away out of the corner of my eye. I turned to look and saw nothing unusual. I went back to perusing the internet for a moment, paused, then looked over my other shoulder. Trailing out from under the pillow my head was on was the scaly body of a fairly large snake. In an instant I realized that the snake was under the pillow. The tickle on my neck had been the snake tasting me. Much leaping about and screaming ensued. Sure enough, it was a 5-foot long black snake, which at least is harmless. It was wrapped around my head, in my living room, on my couch. What freaked me out the most was that I never even heard it moving. Never even felt it sneaking under my pillow. It was days before I could sit on that couch again. I kept seeing that snake under my pillow. Our pet turkey, who we kept on the roof of our apartment complex, this was in Mexico, pooped all over a Jehovah's Witness that came knocking on our door. I had an apartment in downtown Denver that had a spectacular view of a bunch of crazy crap. It was the 3rd floor on a corner of a 3-lane one-way. There were wrecks on a weekly basis and we just got used to keeping binoculars handy as soon as we heard tires screeching. There was a lot of prostitution, drugs, muggings. In the 2 years I lived there I got attacked twice. We also kept a bunch of weapons by the front door just in case. The wall of death included nunchucks, police clubs and a golf club left behind when a guy got caught trying to steal my car. So one time I hear a lot of yelling coming from the street. Get on the fricking ground right now. I'm giving you to the count of 3. At least 8 cop cars have converged on a bunch of gang members from both sides of the streets. There was about a dozen black guys in the center of the street and cops blocking all exits with their guns drawn. They must have tailed these guys until the right moment. One side of the street had tall buildings, the other a school with a tall fence, so they were stuck. There was yelling. Most of the gang had their hands up and looked like they were giving up. Then one of them ran. A fat slow moving one too. This was the mid-90s and I don't think tasers were common then. A bunch of SWAT type cops tackled him and beat the crap out of him. They were wailing on him with sticks from all sides. Several of the SWAT guys stayed on him after that. I could see his head lifting up off the ground a few times with the binoculars, so I knew he was still alive. His friends went right to the ground after that. I saw them all get cuffed and they stayed on the ground. The officers would go one at a time and search them. Everything got put into baggies and the hood and trunk of a car. The street was blocked off for almost 2 hours. The one that ran was hauled away in an ambulance. The rest were taken away individually in police cars. You want to know when something really big has gone down? The police keep high-fiving each other during the bust. I have seen 4 of Jupiter's moons. I look at them frequently with my cheap $15 telescope, Galileoscope. It's the most incredible sight the universe has to offer at such a cheap price. I witnessed a guy on a sport bike approach an intersection with a red light. As he got close, the light turned green and he gunned it through the intersection, probably peaking at about 50 miles per hour in a 30-mile-per-hour zone. Only problem was a truck decided to run the red light and the biker T-boned the truck right in front of the rear axle. The bike stopped immediately and the rider went airborne. He traveled about 20-30 feet in the air before hitting the ground and tumbling another 15-20 feet. The only piece of gear he was wearing was a helmet, but it didn't save him. When he hit the truck, his helmet was ejected from his head and he landed headfirst from his flight. According to the paramedics, the rider died on impact with the ground. It was a very gruesome sight, and because of it I always check for cross traffic when approaching a light like the biker did. Hitting an intersection at a high speed just as your light turns green is not a smart idea, but the guy in the truck should not have run the light either. The worst part was that I saw the whole thing coming. From the biker coming up from behind me to the guy running the light, and there was nothing I could do to warn the guy on the bike. An excessive amount of people in my town whine about how the city is moving to roundabouts at appropriate intersections, namely at highway underpasses. In addition to 30% more efficiency in moving traffic, they reduce fatal accidents by 90%. Love it. I was awakened one morning by the sound of a number of low-flying airplanes over my home. I looked outside and saw a bunch of planes overhead and people running and yelling all over the place. I went outside and some other kids yelled at me to follow them. We climbed the fire escape to the roof of the tallest building in our neighborhood, where we saw the planes flying over Pearl Harbor and seeing Pearl in flames. Then a loud explosion rocked our neighborhood when the guns from Pearl Harbor firing at the planes struck a building in the next block. The 7th of December, 1941. 60 years later, I heard a loud explosion outside my office window in Pentagon City, Virginia. Looked out the window and saw the Pentagon in flames. You need to move to the middle of nowhere. About 10 years ago I worked in downtown Albany, NY. I was out having a cigarette at about 8 AM on a spring sun morning. I'm just all looking around, enjoying the quiet of a weekend morning in this pseudo city. All of a sudden my left eye detects movement and I turned my head just into to see an attorney complete his 30-story journey to the sidewalk. I mean splat, and, only about 10 feet away from me, I was horror struck. Ran in and called the police and didn't even go back outside until after they left. I do remember peeking out of the front window just to see what was going on. I saw something that forever changed me. A firefighter was washing the guts of the former attorney down the sewage drain, and when he got to a piece of the skull that would not fit, he walked over and kicked it in. He kicked part of former Mr. Attorney's skull down the sewer. My realization that morning: we are all just disposable. Hardly any one person is truly important at all. So the only true reward in life is to surround yourself with people who care about you, cause everyone else will kick your skull down the frickin' drain. Coincidental side note: I am now married to an attorney. We were dating at the time when this actually happened. It almost put her off law school, but we figured the guy was just some poor soul. Palm to head. I only have one eye and a fake eye. I may not be able to participate. Well, the craziest thing that you saw with two eyes probably caused you to have one eye. When I was about 9, I convinced my mom to take me to Blockbuster to rent a movie on a Friday afternoon. She opened the front door of the house. We both stepped outside, and an FBI agent taking cover behind the tree in our front yard told us curtly that everything was going to be okay, but we should go back inside. Turned out a guy living at the other end of the street pulled a gun on a kid playing in his front yard, took 2 shots and missed both before the kid got to his house. It wasn't the FBI. When in Michigan when I was little, we saw a lightning storm at night on the beach. The whole sky was lit up, and the lightning was practically continuous for minutes on end. There was no wind, only the greatest fireworks display I have ever seen. Yep, that's what happens up here in Michigan. That, and winters that stop for a day or two before coming back in full force. I've seen so many fricked up things. One that immediately stands out is once years ago now, I went to a Deftones show in RI. There were about 2,000 people there. After the show ended, a full-fledged riot broke out, over what I have no clue. I mean balls out fighting in the middle of the street. It was smack dab in at the entrance exit. It was almost impossible not to be involved if you were unlucky enough to have already exited the building. Of course I was outside, ducking, dodging and running. That's when the police riot squad busted through the crowd on horses. Let me tell you, that seeing 5 mounted police run straight through a crowd on huge fricking horses is impressive. I mean, if you were unlucky enough to be in the horse's path, you were set flying through the air. It was scary as crap but fricking impressive as heck. The riot subsided in minutes and the police pushed everyone back when backups came in. I'd be that Peter if I had to see the Deftones. For the people that don't know, Blackpool Pleasure Beach is a theme park in England. It's literally meters away from the sea and there's a ton of rides, which back in the day included the biggest roller coaster in the UK. When I was 7, my parents took me there for a day out. We were just about at the entrance of the theme park as the screaming started. A fighter jet flew literally meters over this huge roller coaster I had been dying to see. The whole plane seemed to be on fire, with a lot of smoke coming out of the engines. Luckily enough, the tide was out, so when the pilots ejected, they landed on the beach and the jet continued further out into the bay. It's still one of my most vivid memories. I can still remember the sound of the impact, the fireball and the incredibly pungent smell of jet fuel. The police ambulance sirens kicked in almost instantly. I think I heard later that the pilots knew they were in trouble and headed towards the beach. They suffered a few broken bones, but thankfully there were no fatalities. It was one of the most surreal moments that I've ever experienced. Standing on the corner of my street, watching the Twin Towers collapse. After helping clean up my great uncle's house, it was getting dark, so I was leaving and shut all the lights off and headed towards the front door. For some reason I got the urge to say goodbye Uncle Fred out loud, so I did. Suddenly the entryway lights flicked on and the stereo in the entryway turned on as I was passing them, and the stereo started playing music like some kind of message from beyond the grave. Completely freaked me the frick out. Unfortunately, it didn't turn out to be a ghost after all. One of the lights I turned off actually turned on that section of the house, which took about 45 seconds to start up for some reason. Old house, old wiring. I was able to replicate the results repeatedly, used said information to scare the heck out of family members, and of course whenever I tell the story I don't mention the last part about figuring it out. Uncle Bill used to live next door to us when I was about 13. He was about 60, retired and lived with his wife. Really nice guy. Our family would go out on his boat once in a while, Christmas drinks with him, etc. etc. This went on for a few years, so we knew him pretty well. One day I'm sitting at home when a police SWAT team come down our side passage and motion me to move back inside. Out the back, we live on a canal. A police boat has turned up. Bit of chaos ensues, yelling next door, etc. etc. Turns out Uncle Bill had been robbing armored trucks for years, along with his son-in-law. They stole millions and he was one of Australia's most wanted. I still say he was quite a nice guy, even though he'd been dousing one armored truck driver with petrol and threatening the other driver that his partner would be set on fire. I'd never have picked him, and I've known a lot of dodgy characters. In 2001 I was almost blown up by an IRA car bomb. The back of the boat trunk exploded open and loads of smoke started pouring out. It turned out only the detonator went off, and the 88 pounds of high explosives remained intact. If it wasn't for poor Irish workmanship I wouldn't be here today. I can link to some news reports if anyone is interested. You've been visited by a dog. It's a regular dog but he's a good boy. If you comment pet he'll let you pet him. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check out another video, or don't. Either way, have a great day you magnificent people.